My dad was very hard, and my dad was very, very like, he didn't show
Honest.
He was honest, but to a point where I'd get in the car. If I'd scored a hat trick, I could have scored 7, 8 goals in a game, and I'd be sitting there waiting on the journey home for him to say well done. And I'd be thinking like, what, like any chance you just saying like, oh, what a goal that was today or something. And so I'd sit there after 10, 15 minutes and I'd go, I've done all right today, Dad, didn't I? And he'd go, yeah, you've done all right.
Hello and welcome to a brand new podcast. It's called Talent Takes Practice, and it's with me, Matthew Syed, and my co-host for every single episode will be the one and only Robbie Savage. We're really lucky on our first ever podcast to have a couple of fantastic guests. I've got a script here where I have to introduce them, but frankly, I'm throwing that script down because they don't need any introduction. We've got Rio and Anton Ferdinand, two fantastic footballers, played in the same position, grew up in the same family, might be a bit of sibling rivalry going on. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. I know that Robbie reached out to you, but I'm kind of surprised that you agreed to. Are you mates with Robbie, Anton?
Well, played against each other a few times. He a bit mouthy on the pitch, but we seem to be all right now.
Matthew, I've got someone in common with these two. A, I'm harder than them. B, I'm fitter than them. C was a better player than the pair of them, but they can't accept it.
That's the A, B and B of it. Rio, so it was Robbie irritating to play against? Or what was he like as an opponent?
Yeah, he was irritating. I think he created a persona on the pitch that probably didn't represent him off it. He was annoying. He was somebody that got really on your nerves. He got me sent off once, and I ended up beating him up in the tunnel. But it's all right. We're all right now. We're mates now.
But do you know what, Matthew? I was fortunate enough to be at Rio's wedding, and that was the first time I really got to know Anton, and we had a great chat. And obviously on the pitch, I was an idiot. Just wanted to win. And Anton said I hated you on the pitch, and same as Rio, but off the pitch, I'm a different animal. On the pitch, I wanted to win, as Anton and Rio did, and I'm sure that, we'll talk about their kids and, their life and how much they wanted to win and what they say to their children. But I think we're all sportsmen, as you as well, Matthew, wanted to win and would do anything to win.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, Robbie, because I mentioned in that intro, Rio and Anton, that, you're not a dissimilar age, came from the same household. You wanted to aspire in the same sport, in the same position, both immensely talented, clearly very determined. I ought to throw into the mix here that I was a table tennis player, but my biggest rival growing up was my brother, Andrew, 2 years older, a little bit better, and that was a massively important part of my life. And one of the things that made me so ambitious was to beat him. So, Rio, can you sort of take us back to what it was like back then? Neither of you knew at that point that you were going to excel, but was it about being better than Anton, or was it about being the best you could be?
No, I mean, the age difference between me and Anton's 7 years, so that takes out that competitive edge, because I was far more, in terms of age and maturity and physicality, etc., advanced because of the age difference. But so my role really with Anton was to just always push him. Never about trying to get him to make it to football. I just wanted to make him as good as he could be. He wanted to be a footballer. He used to come and watch me play, and he's on the sidelines, and he wanted to be a player. So I would just I'd go in goal, and he'd play 1v1 against our neighbour, and I'd just let his neighbour win all the time, or I'd get really close to the end, and it would be 5-all or 10-all, and it's right, winning goal, we've got to go upstairs, and I'd always probably let the other boy win, unless Anton done something outrageous and just smashed it past me. But I'd be in goal and would never let him score, and he'd just cry and run go upstairs, and he'd go, "You let him win," etc. But I used to think like I'm getting you tough. You've got to be used to losing. You've got to understand that losing is part of it and deal with it. And you've got to do more to beat him than he's got to beat you. You've got to go that extra mile, and that's the way it was.
Can I just pick up on Anton? I want to throw it your way in a second. But Rio, that point that you made there, you'd be interested in this, Robbie, about young people needing to have the toughness to deal with defeat. You know, failing occasionally is a part of life. It's how you deal with it that matters most. Do you take that attitude that you had as an older sibling into being a parent? Because I've got to be honest, I've got 2 young ones and I don't want them to lose. I want to help them. I want to let them beat me at Connect 4. But actually, that's not a smart thing to do. What do you like with your kids?
The same, exactly the same. They hate me when it comes to computer games, to playing cards, to playing board games. I will not let them win because I just feel you've got to understand it, and I'll celebrate, and they've got to understand that losing is part of life. But are you going to come back again, or are you going to give up? That's the key. Like Anton always came back next day or that afternoon. He'd come back and he'd want to play because that was just he had that in him. And it's interesting because I've got 2 boys that want to be footballers that play, and there's like a 2.5 year difference between them. So the younger one's playing catch up all the time, and they end up almost fighting a lot of the times if it's doing 1v1s and stuff like that, which I like, and I'll let them go to a certain extent, and I have to understand that there's that battle. One of them, the older one's obviously a little bit better runner, but I'm saying to the second one, well, you've got to catch him. You might lose, but you get closer next time. Get closer until you're near him, and that's always the way that I try and treat him, because I don't do it just to be good footballers. I think it's a life skill.
Right.
Are you going to be someone that comes back from being rejected at some point? Are you? And I look at things like the way they train, the way they apply themselves every day. Are they like? They attention to detail. They make sure they get that last rep done, that last run done. Don't cut corners. That will be reflected in their life and the way that they are going forward. So I take a lot from it, and I'll say like, you cheat or you don't finish your homework with maths or whatever. That will start creeping into your football, into your training. So I try and relate things to things that they like, so they improve in all aspects really.
Anton, you know, Rio spoke so well about you there. You know, growing up, when you used to go and watch Rio, how inspirational he was he to you? You know, watching him play, watching him at grassroots, you know, following it. Probably, did you have to get up early, you know, with your family and go and watch him, go in the car? There was times when you probably did want to go, you know, but how much of an inspiration was he to you?
He was a massive inspiration to me. I mean, it was always an education. I looked at it as an education when I went and watched him play, because he was that good from a young age. He was that good in my eyes. He was anyway. When he used to play for Elton Town, even going to watch him play for them, and it was just an education to see like his work ethic was different to other people, you know, and that never say die attitude. He's always had that. It's never a case of when he started to play for West Ham, he's always had that. And
but you know that, Anton, you know now, you know when you were growing up though, do you know, like I've got 2 boys now, as you know, 3 years between them. Would there be times when, you know, your mother or you know, your dad would say, do you know what, you've got to come, but you wanted to maybe do something else? You weren't never forced to go and watch him. It was always you wanted to go and watch him and encourage him.
Yeah, at a younger age, I was always, I didn't need to be forced to go and watch him. I always wanted to go and watch. As I got a bit older and I started to like different things and started to get into different things, then it was more of a case of, Anton, you're coming to watch. As I say, I saw it as it being educational and seeing someone that you look up to as your brother, someone who's your hero, to watch the steps and be with them every step of the way, in terms of watching them, not being on the pitch, but watching them day to day, watching them every Saturday. And I still remember Rio being, I think he was an under-16, and he played in FA Youth Cup. I think it was semi-finals, was it semi-finals or the finals against Chelsea?
Yeah, the Southern Junior Floodlit Cup.
The Floodlit Cup it was, yeah, that's it. And you playing in a number 10 role, and you was younger than all of the other boys. But your appetite for the game and the way that you took, remember you didn't play the first game and they lost the first game, and then you played the second game in a number 10, and the way you took the ball, took the game by the scruff of the neck and made it your game, you know, that was a big moment for me to say that this is what I want to do. I want to be that type of person. I want to come into West Ham and people were saying, you see that kid Anton Ferdinand, he's going to be a player. And that was a pivotal moment for me in my upbringing and watching Rio.
So interesting, Anton. You described Rio, your brother, as a role model, somebody you looked up to, somebody who was a bit of a hero. And I can see how you wanted to emulate and copy his attitude, the fact that he was taking ownership over his training and his own personal responsibility to be the best he could be. But Rio, I mean, you were clearly tough in the right way, in the way you mentored Anton. But where did that come from in you? How did you internalise that?
So my dad was always doing combative stuff, and he wasn't into football at all, but he was into physical working. Like, he used to like working out. So he'd get on a bike, and he'd know I've got training or something, and he'd go, "You've got to keep fit to play football." So he'd get on a bike, and he'd just say, "Follow me. Wherever I go, you've got to follow me on the bike." And I'd be running, and I'd be almost crying, thinking, "This is killing me. What is he doing?" And then we'd get to somewhere, and he'd go and do like doggies, run back and forth, etc. Some different physical stuff, like ab stuff, press ups and stuff. And he'd go, "Right, run with me now behind the bike, back to the estate."
From what age was that happening, Rio?
That was like 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, all of them ages. Like, it was just like relentless. Probably enough, I'm 11, 12, 13. So he was just like relentless. And my dad was very stern, as Anton will tell you. He was very like, there was no, "Dad, I can't." It was like, "What do you mean you can't? Follow me." And then that was it.
And at that point in your life, Rio, was football something that you were passionate about already? In other words, was he kind of pushing you to do something that you already loved? Or was he pushing you to do something that actually I wasn't that keen on, but I got keen on it later?
Yeah, so whatever we were interested in, so whether it was like drama, athletics, I'd done ballet at a young age, football, it all fell into, if you're interested, we'll facilitate you getting there. And my dad was like, "I'm going to train you."
So, Anton, you mentioned there about, the pathways, and I'm sure, as I've spoke to Rio and yourself on many occasions, there will be, youngsters in your community who might have had the talent, but the pathways they probably chose were wrong. How did you pick the correct pathways? Was it from your parents?
Yeah, it was definitely from our mum and dad. We grew up on an estate which was it was multicultural first and foremost, but it had there was a lot of stuff happening on it. A lot of my friends, as Rio would know, I probably wasn't the best on my estate in my age group, but I had the backing of my parents. Some of them didn't, and some of them took the wrong path. But I think what kept me on the straight and narrow was I feared disappointing my mum and dad and my brother more than accepting to hold, whether it be drugs or a knife, from someone on the estate. I would happily say no to them, just so I wouldn't disappoint and upset my mum, dad and my brother. I feared that more than actually holding anything for someone that I shouldn't be.
On the estate, Anton, take us there. Tell us what it was like. About the flat that you lived in or the house that you lived in. You talked about it was being multicultural. You kind of alluded to a gang culture there. I grew up in suburban Reading, a million miles away. I went to a comprehensive school, working class background, but completely different. What was it? And, the school I went to, I'm mixed race, half Pakistani, half Welsh. I was the only brown-skinned boy in the class. What was it like? Because I know that Rio, later in life, you went to the school in which Stephen Lawrence went to, who was murdered, of course, famously. And just try and give us a flavour of what it was like growing up there, the challenges you faced.
The challenges, as I say, I've probably painted it to be worse than probably what it was. Yes, there was challenges in terms of gang members coming onto the estate, but in terms of our actual estate, it was all about football, to be honest with you. It was all about football for us. And whoever had the ball was the cool kid, and we just wanted to get on the pitch and play football on the back grass or on the pen or over the road to the adventure playground and play football. But it was a case of like we never ever looked around and thought, okay, well, that person's white, that person's black, that person's Indian, that person's Chinese, because everyone was there. We was just one, you know. And I think the biggest thing, the difference now on an estate to when I grew up and when Rio grew up is there's a community in terms of, so if our estate was really, really big, so if we was on a part of an estate where our family, our mum and dad couldn't see us, and one of our friends' mum and dads lived over that way, and we was acting up, their parents could actually say, listen, Anton, Rio, what are you doing? Sort yourself out. And that was accepted, you know. Or it would be a case of they'd ring through to mum, and they'll come back and say, mum said you better go get home now. So it was that type of community vibe on the actual estate. But it was very, very competitive on the estate. I remember watching Rio and his friends. They're all a lot older than me, and most of them are older than Rio as well. And the competitiveness, not just at football, but they used to do 100-metre sprints down a road called Friary Road. And it was a case of you can't lose. If you lost, then you was the joke for the rest of the night, and you'd get opened up for the rest of the night. And I suppose watching that and then taking that into my age group, it prepared me for football and for what a football change room is really like.
So, you know, it's interesting there, Anton and Rio. So, we've all done exceptionally well in our field, whether it's Matthew in table tennis and writing and books, and you two in football. What we went through to get to where we wanted to get to in terms of the community, taking the ball out, going on the local grass pitch, putting jumpers down. You know, our kids, you know, have all come from, probably because we've done well, we worked exceptionally hard to get what we get to, affluent backgrounds where our kids, well, my kids in particular, can't get the ball and walk out to all their mates, you know, and go on that grass pitch. So how do you instill those, you know, that mentality, that belief into your children, Rio? Because I suppose, like me, they won't be able to get the ball and walk to all their mates like 20 aside on the local grass pitch.
Yeah, that's a big difference, and I'm always talking to like Anton and my mates and that about like how do you instill the friendships, how do you instill that hardness, that ability to be able to handle yourself among groups of people when the adult isn't there. Like for instance, like now, if my kids are going to be getting their mates over or going to their mate's house, it's organised through the parents. It's a play date almost, do you know what I mean? So it's very different, whereas we were just thrown out the front door and said, come back when dinner time is. And you've got to then make your way through the estate and find people, go and knock for them, talk to adults, communicate with people, ask for things, and then navigate your way through that day without a parent overlooking over your shoulder and managing that process. It's a big difference. So you understand how to talk to people, you understand how to be a bit robust in certain situations and just manage yourself, whereas it's now kids are taken everywhere, they're picked up, every single part of their life is really managed, where it's a big difference. So then to transfer that into football, for your children to go into a football club and be able to talk to people, to be able to, because these kids don't talk to anyone other than if they're playing on a headset on the computer game. Everything's via text, everything's via social media. So for a kid to go and then prepare them to go into a football club, I think it's a big thing, and that's why we're lucky with the school that we send our kids to. That's very big on them, but also at home. If we're in a restaurant, I see so many kids when a waiter comes over. If you're in a restaurant, and the waiter would go to the child, right? What do you want, son or love? What do you want? And they'll look at their parents. And my kids used to do that at the beginning. I'd say, "What are you looking at me for? Answer the way. Answer. What do you want? Don't tell me. Tell him."
Rio, I've got to say, I think this is one of the most important issues for young people today, this helicopter parenting, the mollycoddling. And actually it's schools as well, by the way, because they learn in very controlled environments, they absorb all of this knowledge, and then they're tested on whether they can regurgitate that knowledge, you know, whether they can... It's basically a memory test. What we need in the world of the future is initiative, the ability to take sensible risks, to make mistakes and learn from them. Because if you think about the digital world that kids are going to arrive in, I work in print journalism. I write for the Sunday Times and the Times. You know, newspapers won't exist in a decade. just being good at one thing, there is no profession for life. You have to be adaptable. You have to look for opportunities. You have to have the creativity and curiosity. So everything you just said there, Rio, I think is what we need in our education system. Parents need to understand to give their kids the space to come up with new ideas, to order from the menu. It sounds like a trivial thing. It's a significant thing. Let's go back to what you said earlier about occasionally messing up. Tell me whether this resonates. You know, my daughter took the risk of taking a lead role in a school play. And when you're in front of a lot of people, there's a chance you might fluff your lines. She fluffed her lines. I spent most of the evening praising her for having had the courage to go up there. I said, every great actor or actress has fluffed their lines at one time or another. What would have really hurt me is if you were passionate about acting and you never got on the stage because you wanted to stay perfect. You can't have that. So, you mentioned, Rio, about it's really interesting about trying to get your kids to take the initiative, to decide what they want to eat, to express it to a waiter or to a waitress. When you're talking to your kids when they've messed up, do you go after them, or do you say, you know what, I'm glad you gave it a go? How do you find that balance?
It's a mixture of things. Sometimes I might go at them. Like if you're relating it to football and one of my kids make a mistake, like if I'm outside messing about with them and we're doing something, I go, what are you doing? And I'll be on them, like, sort your feet out, do it properly. Or they're not doing it with the intensity that I feel they should be doing it with, and I'll go, well, okay, I'm going to go in then, I'll leave you to it, see you later. And then I'm not thinking about that moment there, I'm thinking about tomorrow. What's the question going to be? Are they going to ask me to go outside again because they want to keep doing it? And they're going to show me that they're doing it differently and that the intensities that I was asking for is there, or the quality with which they're working is there. Or are they going to go, you know what, I'll just stay and play computer. I gauge what they're like through things like that. I think going at my kids constantly, listen, I'm probably getting it wrong some of the time, but I try not to. You have to stop yourself because you want them to do so well, but to keep peppering them all the time with like criticism and being negative, I don't think works. Sometimes I go, okay, see you later. And I'll walk in, I won't say what the problem is. And then maybe later I'll say to them, well, why do you reckon I walked in earlier? And then I want you to tell, then they tell me, and I go, okay, so next time you want me to stay out, you act right.
I'm loving this conversation because you're so strategic as a dad. My wife says I'm a bit overly strategic, but I think like that. Robbie, do you relate to all this as a dad?
Yeah, 100%. You know, where on a previous podcast, Anton and Rio, which we done with Andrew Flintoff, we talked about, there was an episode about youngsters, and Matthew at one point, and we disagreed, myself and Freddie, that his son would pay 20 pence or 30 pence if he'd done something right. He was actually paying his child to, if he achieved something, he would pay him, which I totally disagree with. Anton, I know your son is at a development squad. He's only 6, isn't he? You know, there was no way in the world, 7. There was, you know, I disagreed with that. An incentive to do well. Surely it was wrong, wasn't it?
Yeah, for me that's wrong. Putting money in a kid's pocket because they've done something well, for me is wrong. I think, especially at my son's age, praise should be enough. I think I always wanted praise from Rio or my dad. That was enough for me, you know. And moving on to later life, it was a case of my family told me I was a good enough footballer. Forget about Rio, I was a good enough footballer. So whatever they said to me, whatever was said within our 4 walls of our flat in Peckham, that's what mattered. Anything that people had to say outside of it, we don't really care about it, you know. And that weren't done on, okay, well, you do this and that's great, we're gonna give you something. It was, okay, that's great, you've done well for yourself. You know, that was always, you done well for yourself. I didn't do well for Rio, I didn't do well for my mum, I didn't do well for my dad, I done well for myself. And let's say my son's 7 and West Ham have been after him for a very, very long time, and I've always said no to West Ham until about 3 months before the lockdown has started. And they always used to ask me, why are you saying no to us? And I said, because the pressure that my son will be under there. You walk into Chadwell Heath, there's pictures of Rio, there's pictures of me, you know. But my wife said to me, listen, he's always going to have this. So you have to let him get used to it now from this young age. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fair enough. So when I spoke to West Ham, they have 2 different squads. They have an indoor squad, which is the academy, and they have the development squad, which is outside. And they wanted to put him directly in with the academy squad. And I said to them, no, that's not the way to do it. I said, if he's going to come, he has to go outside with the development squad. And they was like, yeah, but he's good enough to go inside. I said, whether he's good enough or not, let him make your decision for you. He needs to go outside and prove to himself and prove to you that he's good enough to be inside. And it was like, yeah, but we know he's good enough. I said, no, I want him to go outside so he understands he's not here because Dad played for West Ham. He's here because he's a good player and he's here in his own right. And not just that, I grew up hearing, you will never be as good as Rio. I grew up hearing this stuff. And I know he's going to get that at some point. But for me as a parent, I don't want to go and sit upstairs and watch my son training and hear a parent go, he's only here because of his dad. If I know that he's worked his way in from outside and he's proved to himself that he's good enough to get inside and proved to the coach he's good enough to get inside, people saying that ain't going to affect me.
Anton, do you know what? Anton, do you know what? I can honestly relate to that, as I've spoke to Rio about this, that I've been at Manchester United. My boy's been there since the age of 5. He's a second-year scholar now, and I've heard it. He's only here because of his dad. And that, for me, it really, really hurt. And it hurt Charlie because I'm like you, and I know one of Rio's boys is at a club and the other one isn't. I wanted him to be successful on his own, and I used to stay out of it. I used to let my wife give her number or my wife take him. And I was holding myself back because if I turned up for games, all of a sudden, you know, because I was recognisable, that's Robbie Savage, which one's his boy? And the pressure would automatically come on him. And I thought as a parent, I'm putting even more pressure by going to watch my son. So I wouldn't go and watch him as often as I could and stand back because the pressure would automatically, listen, and the Ferdinand name is huge. So for Anton, I relate to what you say. And Rio, for you, when you go and watch one of your boys in an academy, that must be so hard that when you turn up, listen, you're a global superstar. People say, there's Rio Ferdinand. Same with you, Anton. That's added pressure for our children.
It is, and I don't know, I've been lucky so far that my boys, at the moment, doesn't seem like it affects them. They don't hear the noise. I've always tried to say to them, whatever anyone says to you, you'll determine if you're good enough or not. And I've said to them since they were young, you ain't going to a football club because I say so. You're going to a football club if you get asked. And I'll tell you, if a scout asks me, I will tell you. And so any idea that I'm going to get you in or you're going to get a cheap shot into a club ain't happening. You will earn the right only. And so, and I think, I don't know if I'm lucky or just because of the way we've brought them up, is that at the moment, they don't feel that pressure of being, because they're my kid. And that's refreshing. And it's good to see, but they're getting to an age now where there might be kids in their age group that say stuff to them and then it's how they react because they haven't had that yet. So,
would you say though, Ree, that perhaps you might not feel that because you haven't been in that position where there is pressure in terms of you're following someone's footsteps? Yeah, you had Les, but it's a second cousin. Whereas like me, I know the exact feeling. So I'm probably a bit more protective than you because I know the feeling. I've had it. I've listened to it. You know. So, but as I say, my son hasn't. He don't understand. He don't feel the pressure yet. He's too young. You know. He doesn't. But one thing that was apparent to me very, very young, to watching him. And like going anywhere with him, like for instance, going to a Turkish restaurant to pick up takeaway, and I'll take him with me, and he'll have his football kit on. And the first thing that they'll say to him, "Are you going to be better than your dad and your uncle?" You know, that's the first thing they'll say to him. Are you going to be better than your dad and your uncle? You know, that's pressure in itself.
So Anton, you know what you're saying there, that you had the pressure of Rio. How did that make you feel when you used to hear, like, because sibling rivalry? I know the 7 years between you, so it wasn't that great, but how did that make you feel? Because, you know, my brother's 4 years older than me, and I've never sat him down and asked him, do you know what, being the younger sibling, and he's done great in his own life, he's done great in his field, but, you know, I was the one who would be in the papers, I was the one everybody talked about, and, you know, you've both had amazing careers, but when everybody used to hear people say, well, you're not going to be like Reed, you're not this, how did that make you feel?
I would just let it bounce off of me. As I said, I would always revert back to my to being in the flat in Peckham and being told whatever gets said within these four walls, that's all that matters. I just reverted back to that, you know, and not just that. Here in Rio, like, as much as how competitive he is and stuff, and probably deep down he would never have wanted me to be better than him because he's that competitive, but he wanted me to make it as a footballer. I think he always showed me that support. So I didn't really, I don't know, the way I was brought up and the environment I was brought up in, it hardened my skin to be able to deal with that type of stuff and let it just bounce off of me, if I'm honest.
What have you said? I think it was you, Rio, about my youngest, Freddie. He plays in my team, and he's quite petite, and he hasn't hit that growth spurt yet. And we played in the semi-final, and I had a few scouts afterwards saying, "Do you know what? Would he come in?" And I said, "He's not ready. He's not ready." You know, maybe am I being selfish? I'm not sure I am, because at 14, you know, technically he's good, but he is quite small, and I don't want him to go into a club and get disappointed, told he's not good enough, he's got a difficult time enough at school, the pressure on school. Am I being selfish? I know you've got two, one's in academy, one's not. You know, am I being selfish not to allow my boy to go into academy? Maybe I'm doing it, because financially, you know, I had a decent career. Maybe if I was, you know, in a different situation, maybe I would push my boy into an academy.
I don't know. I don't mind seeing them foul. I've got to be honest with you. I just think it's part of life. They just got to deal with it. And I think if you can be there to support them and just to reinforce that. Listen, guy, if you're going to go in, you might not get a contract, but just put your best foot forward. And if it don't work out, we'll just go back to what you was doing before. And then in a year or two's time, you can come back. It's like what you were talking about before, Matthew, about always saying well done and reinforcing, oh, you've done really well all the time, any given situation. I don't agree with that. I only because my experience, like, my dad was very hard, and my dad was very, very, like, he didn't show
honest.
He was honest, but to a point where I'd get in the car, if I'd scored a hat-trick, I could have scored 7, 8 goals in a game, and I'd be sitting there waiting on the journey home for him to say well done. And I'd be sitting thinking, like, what, like, any chance you just saying, like, oh, what a goal that was today or something. And so I'd sit there after 10, 15 minutes and I'd go, I've done all right today, Dad, didn't I? And he'd go, yeah, you've done all right.
It's so
wow.
It's so interesting because you meet. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of world-class sports people, and I've got to tell you, a lot of them had dads who were incredibly tough. I mean, David Beckham's father, Ted. I went and spent a couple of hours talking to him, and he would say David would have scored 3 free kicks, and I wouldn't give him that praise. I'd make him work harder for the praise, because I thought that was one of the ways I could motivate him to get better. Coming back to something you said earlier, by the way, about how to get the balance with kids who are passionate about something and then pushing them to fulfill their promise in that passion, I think that's really powerful. I think the problem is if kids are doing something not because they're truly passionate about it, but because they're doing it to please a parent or coach, that's too big a contradiction, right? These are the kind of kids who are going to burn out. I think if you allow, as you said, Rio, the young person to make a commitment to a sport or an activity they really care about, and then you encourage them that way, you're going with the grain of their motivation. And I think that's one of the things that's quite difficult as a parent, is to give kids that space to try and figure out where they want to go, and then do all the things that you mentioned about how to encourage them.
The kids there that you're talking about, who are doing it for their parents or being really pushed by the parents, they're the kids that when they come up and they get a challenge in their life or it doesn't go the way they want it, they're the ones that normally down tools and give up early and say, you know what, I can't do this, I'm tired of this now, I'm 16 years old, I've been doing this for 6 years, after time I've not really wanted to go, if they say to themselves, but they make up an excuse probably and walk away from it. And it's a lot of the time, I think, it's down to that pushy parent or the kid just really trying to please that parent, and it's not really their passion.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's a lot of scientific evidence that backs up that analysis, because they do these big data sets to work out why some people persevere, why they continue to commit. And it's a lot to do with the internal passion.
Just talking about that, you're talking about data. You done a book, didn't you, called Bounce?
Yeah, my first book in 2010, yeah.
That talks about the 10,000 hours. Can you just explain that a little bit? Because, like, I've not read it yet, unfortunately, but I understand the idea behind I've heard so much about it in that respect.
Yeah, thanks, Rio. So basically the idea is we tend to obsess about talent, and we tend to exclude all of these other things that are important if you want to be the best that you can be. Because you also need great coaching. You need great parenting. You need mentoring. You need the motivation. Most importantly, you need to clock up practice. Because if you walked onto a football pitch, no matter what your genetic makeup, and you haven't gone through those hours of playing in the adventure playground, sprinting down the street, manipulating the ball, doing keep-me-ups, playing matches, you're never going to be able to fulfill that talent. So what I was trying to do in Bounce is to say, yep, talent's a factor, but unless we take a step back and look at all of these other dimensions that are important for people to reach the top, we're not going to be able to help people to get to where they can get to. So that's basically the argument. In fact, almost everything we've been talking about today fits into the stuff that I was talking about in Bounce. And actually, the second book so might be a good moment to transition into another thing, because I mentioned a bit earlier about my racial background. You know, I grew up as the only kid with brown skin in my school. When I left school, there was a bakery, and on the back door, it had this racist slogan with the P word: "Kick peas out of this country." And I walked past it every single day for about 6 years, and every time I walked by, I was hoping I wasn't with a friend or, you know, a girl that I might fancy, because it made me feel excluded. We've had a massive cultural moment in this country and around the world over the last couple of months with Black Lives Matter. I think it's a real opportunity to reset who we think we are and how we define ourselves as a nation. I would love to hear your perspective on this, what it was like growing up from your background. You're both mixed race, as I understand, I think. Just tell us what it was like. Yeah, perhaps Anton, if you could start. I'd love to know what you make of it.
Where we are now, I think it's the first time where we can sense there's going to be change, you know, I think. But the biggest thing for me is that in the difference in now to back when we was younger or back before our time, is that everyone's talking about racism the way it should be spoken about. You know, and leaders and the people that are in the powers that be, they're seeing people that look like themselves when they look in the mirror talking about racism in a negative way. You know, so they're looking at it and going, you know what, someone that I look like is talking about this, there must be a problem. You know, I think that's what's creating that sense, that air of change within the world and within our country. But growing up, we never ever saw colour. You know, we never saw it.
Was football was an inclusive community for you?
Yeah, but it wasn't just the football. Our environment on our estate, anything we'd done, it wasn't there. Look, there's that Turkish boy. It was there's Osman, who was my best friend growing up. You know, or there's that black boy or that African boy, or it was just there's so and so. You know, there was never any colour that even entered our head, you know.
But this is so, Anton, sorry to interrupt. That is so interesting, because one of the things that people are saying today is that if you are from an ethnic minority, you're always conscious of who you are, of your identity, of the colour of your skin, about being excluded. But you didn't feel that growing up. You felt that this community in Peckham, on the estate, they valued you for who you were, your character, not your colour.
Yeah, and then when I started to understand that colour played a part was when I started to venture off the estate and go to different areas. That's when I started to realise that colour. Don't get me wrong, I was brought up to know I was a black man. That's how we was brought up. We are black men. You know, my mum was white, our dad is black, but we was always told from our mother, who was white, society sees you as a black man, so you are black. You know, and listen, I didn't quite understand that until I did come off the estate and started to hear certain things and hear. So,
for example, Anton, you know, you leave the estate. Was it the N-word? Was it people excluding you? What did it feel like for you? I'll give you an example. I went to when the new Den first opened, Millwall's ground, when they first opened, and it was their first game. They played against Liverpool, and a lot of our friends were Liverpool supporters.
But one of my friends, his name's Scott, he's a Millwall fan, and we went to the game. And we went to go and watch John Barnes, who we all loved on the estate. And we were sitting in the in one of the stands at the New Den. And John Barnes done something. I think he got fouled, and they thought he dived. And everyone was shouting. I know at Millwall, unless you stood up and got involved, they'll look at you and go, "What are you for the other team? What are you doing here?" And they would cause trouble. So like you stand up and you shout referee or whatever, and then all of a sudden I heard, "John Barnes, you black so and so," and I looked and I turned to him and I was like, "What?" And he went, "No, not you, mate. You're right. You're one of us." And I heard that and I was like, I started to process it and I was like, "Listen." And I heard after that I had to leave. I just got up. I said to the boy, I said, "Listen, I can't stay. I got to go," and I left. And that was one of my first real encounters of racism in terms of going to a football match. And I said I left because it was like I'm the same as him. I'm black, but I'm okay because I'm with you. I couldn't quite fathom it. I couldn't understand it. That how comes I'm accepted when I'm like him? How can I be accepted when I'm like him? Just because I support the same team as you? I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't understand it at all.
Thank you, Anton. Rio, what was it like for you? What are your thoughts? Firstly, about growing up as a black man in Peckham, when you left the estate, when you started developing as a footballer, and what was it like to integrate into the elite football community? What were the challenges and barriers?
No, I think a lot of what Anton said is very similar. In terms of growing up, our estate was multicultural, so I didn't feel racism in that sense. There were odd incidents where you might feed it from certain people being called names sometimes here and there, but my general circle of people, it wasn't something that happened. But again, like Anton, I left football. I went on the football pitch. Sometimes there'd be moments where people would call you names, and I got into tussles with people at times. So I always knew that being the colour I was an issue for some people. And certain areas we couldn't go to over a certain main road. You couldn't go from our side to that side past a certain time of night. No chance. You'd be looked at as a lunatic. What are you doing? You're going to go and getting yourself into trouble because of the colour of your skin. So we was always made to be aware. But looking at going from my childhood and then becoming a football player, I think you very much get taken out of reality. And colour, as people may see and speak about you as colour, but to your face, you're treated like a superstar, you're treated like a godlike figure. So colour quickly becomes taken out of that situation. And so you live a bit of a more privileged life in that sense. So for instance, going to a restaurant, I don't get looked at the same way that I'd be one of my friends who's just got a career as a solicitor or whatever he's doing would walk into that restaurant. He'd be looked at as if to say, and I can see that and I sense that as, "Oh, well, why how's he in here?" But obviously I'm seeing things like that from afar. But when it's me, it's not directed at me like that because, oh, it's Rio, he's fine. So football enables you to kind of sidestep a lot of those issues. Even in your normal walk of life. But at the same time, if you're in a place or a country where you're not recognised, it really quickly comes back to that again, and you feel that sense of, oh, actually, I'm seen as a colour rather than as a person now. And so it can take you back to that quickly. But I just think this movement that's happened in recent months, this BLM movement and race being a real hot topic and centre of attention in the media, I think it's a great opportunity now to see some sort of change. I don't think all the slogans have worked in the past. I think all of that is hot air, and it's here today, gone tomorrow, kind of stuff that we've seen. And I think it's time for the organisations and the big corporate companies really to try and lead the way now. I think we're lucky. Me and Sav, we work at BT. I think they're very good in terms of the multicultural workforce that they're trying to implement, and they're always seeming to try and do stuff that's very inclusive in that sense. And I think a lot of companies need to take heed with that and show that. And when you're looking at big corporate companies, in terms of the employment side of things and the way that they bring people in, it should be quite easy to say the best person's going to get the job, but obviously it's just not like that. And I think that some people are judged before they come into a room because their name would suggest that they're from a different cultural background.
Well, I mean, the evidence on that, for what it's worth, is really clear. A couple of economists sent 5,000 CVs to employers, and these candidates were very well qualified. All the CVs were identical, except for one thing. Some of them had archetypal white names, and some had archetypal minority names. And the people with the minority names were 50% less likely to even be invited to interview. So that's called unconscious bias. The employers were surprised. They didn't realise that they were looking at a name and saying, oh my goodness, I don't want that person. They didn't realise that they were interpreting that CV through a racial stereotype. But for what it's worth, I think a lot of companies are now thinking about combating unconscious bias. They're trying to diversify the workforce. One of the reasons, by the way, you have a diverse workforce, it's a more successful workforce. They're more creative. They've got a bigger variety of experiences to draw upon to come up with a new strategy.
But are there bodies or governing bodies that helping them incorporate that within them companies, or is it just down to the individual company to say, oh, actually we've got someone at the helm who's interested in this and who takes it seriously. Actually, I'm deciding as a CEO or a chairman that we should do this, or is there a governing body that's saying you should be doing this?
I mean, in some countries, so for example, in Norway, they had a law that was passed by the government to have a certain proportion of people on the boards of directors of, I think, publicly listed companies. But in most areas of the world, there aren't quotas. It comes from within. But the reason it's coming from within more actively now is because I think the C-suiters, the chief executives, the head of HR, they're beginning to realise if we don't get this right, we're not going to win in the marketplace. Imagine in football, if you said, right, we're not having this talented player because they're black, you're going to lose the football match.
But that's the difference with football. That's why football sometimes is it can't be taken into the wider society of things and the way it's dealt with, because in football, every player means a pound note. And so that takes race out of it. So when a scout's looking at a player, he's not thinking about a colour. I don't think any scout goes in and goes, I'm not taking him because he's black. It doesn't happen. And it's the only industry that I see that in. Every other industry is like, or maybe music, right. But yeah. That's my own opinion. You might have a fact that will tell me different. But football, I just see that in terms of employment as a football player, I think it's difficult for a scout to say, I'm not taking you, when that player could generate millions for that company. It might be different lower leagues. It may be different. And in the terms of the upper echelon of football clubs, in the executive roles, etc., I think is very different. But as in the Class A, the top level of football and youth football, when you're scouting players, I don't see. I would find it hard to believe that a scout says, I'm going to ruin my reputation and not find a gem of a player because he's black.
I think the biggest thing that, as much as things are going in the right direction, I think what we got to be cautious of, I think, is that people like the powers that be, not just in football, but the people who own big corporate companies and that, it's about hiring the right person rather than we're going to tick a box because we're going to put that person because he's ethnic. It has to be the right person too. And I think that's what a lot of people, I think that's going to be the next step to try and calm things down. Is, we got black people in there, but are they a good representation of us as ethnic people? Or are they people who have been groomed to do that role? I think that's a big thing. In the next phase is, are they someone who's been groomed to do that and someone who's going to obey and listen to everything they got to say, or are they going to challenge them to be better? Or are they going to allow people to challenge them to be better? You know, I think there's a thin line. I think when you got people who will challenge your authority, then that's different. Okay, we can't have that because we're the senior partners. You can't challenge our authority. We're owners of the company. That's fine. But if someone's going to challenge you to be better in any way, shape or form, that's something that I think they need to look at and go, that's acceptable. You know, and it's whether these companies and these corporate companies are willing to allow someone who's a good representation of ethnic backgrounds at a higher level. I think that's the difference for me, and I think that's the next phase that we're going to have to tackle, is the right representation, or rather than just a representation because they're of ethnic background.
You know, listen to the three of you speak about racism, you know, taking it back to me as a youngster in Wrexham. You know, in our school, you know, all white boys and girls, and the first black person coming to our school was called Jim Whitley. You know, Rio and Anton, you'll remember the Whitley brothers. And Jim, and it was my first experience of racism, you know, towards Jim, that, you know, he'd come into the classroom, you know, and the words, the names called behind his back was disgraceful. And I didn't see the colour of Jim's skin. I didn't see him as a black person or a white person. I seen him as Jim. And the power of sport, he was so talented. He was a great footballer, went on to play for Man City, a scratch golfer, great singer, great artist. All my paintings in my house are from Jim. You know, and I wanted to get to know Jim for the person he was. You know, people wouldn't sit next to him in class. You know, and I look back now, Rio and Anton, and, you know, it hurts me to think that all these years, and I wrote about it in a newspaper article, that Jim used to go home and cry, the things said about him, and I never really asked him, was he okay? How was he? You know, but what I did, I befriended him because he was Jim, not because he was black, not because he was white, because I seen the person, and what he went on to achieve was quite incredible, quite remarkable. You know, whether he's black or he was white, but I seen the person, and nobody else in our class did, and it was the horrible stuff behind his back, and it really hurt Jim, and I didn't really understand until recently that what Jim would have gone through, and I wish I'd have been there more for him in terms of, you know, my mother and father were great with him. He was my best pal, and still is. I still speak to him a lot, but it was just horrible to witness it at such a young age of the racism that I'm sure you three have experienced. You know, and for me to sit in this chair as a middle-aged white person, I've never experienced what you three and what Jim went through. So for me I know what's right and wrong, so I can say, yeah, it's wrong. You know, racism, it's wrong. It's horrible. But for me, it's very difficult to understand what Jim went through. I know now because I've spoke to him, and what you three went through. Jim, you know, he come from Zambia, and you know, lived in a tough area in Wrexham, very, very tough area, you know, limited modes of transport. My father would pick him up, we'd go out of our way to go and get him, which we'd done right, because we felt, he was my friend, and I wasn't his friend because I felt sorry for him or because people were picking him. He was my friend because he had great morals, he had great work ethic, he was just a great kid, and you know, a lot of people might have stayed away. I don't know what it'd been like. Like, a lot of people might have stayed away from Jim because he was black, but I couldn't see that. And it was abhorrent to think back now that what Jim went through, and for me not to ask him, are you okay, mate? I look back now and think, do you know what, I wish I'd have done more for him.
To be fair, Sav, I understand that you didn't ask him because you wouldn't know. It's like, for instance, if I said to you now, have you ever walked down the road and saw an older lady or a couple of people and thought, I bet I'm going to cross the road because I can see that she feels a bit intimidated that I'm walking next to her or up to her because of the colour of my skin, and you know that's the issue. Or you walk up to a shop window, look in the window, go to walk in, and the security guard says, no, you can't come in, you're not allowed because of the colour of your skin. Do you know what I mean? Or the fact that you're going to go into not an audition, but you're going into a job application, and you're thinking, putting my real name down there is going to be an issue. I think I might have to lie about what my surname is, or going in and thinking, am I going to be judged because of the colour of my skin? I've got probably 50% chance of not getting this job. They're the type of things that a lot of people who aren't from different backgrounds, from ethnic backgrounds, they would never have to consider those things. And so when people say, oh, it ain't that bad, when you just start mentioning a couple of things like that, and then people go, oh, actually, wow, I don't have to do that. I never have to go through that. Or saying to your kids at some point, if a policeman comes over to you and starts stopping you, you've got to act a certain way because you don't know what's going on in the current climate of things. You don't know how the policeman's going to react in the current climate. So you react. What white parents are having them conversations with their kids and saying, I'm actually fearful for my son because of a few things that I'm seeing on social media, in the media now. So you've got to have them certain conversations with your young kids coming into teenage years about the colour of their skin.
So you three educate your children, you educate them.
I think you have to, because obviously our kids now, they're on social media, they're seeing all these things. Dad, what's going on here? The policeman have just killed that other black lady or that black guy. You've got to explain that, and that conversation then goes back to historical and given experiences that we've been through, so the kids are very much aware as to, oh, wow, that does go on. So they're not walking out naive. And
the beauty of your story, though, Robbie, I would say, is now, so your parents educated you not to see colour, which you've now passed on to your children, right? But you're sitting there now regretting that you never checked on Jeff and his brother to see how they were doing and how they felt. You can now install that into your children, you know. So that education moves on, but it filters down. But you're moving it on to something else.
So, I mean, this, I think, has been a genuine, fascinating conversation on race and racism and bigotry. Rio, did you want to... I've got some final questions, by the way, but Rio, you're about to say something.
The only thing I was going to add to what I was saying before is that the only way to help the process of eradicating it is education. I think that is the school curriculum should have some stuff that is relative to these kids recent, and so that there is an interest there, genuine interest that they can touch and feel and see and go, wow, that wasn't too long ago, and have the history as well, but there's to be something that incentivises these kids to want to learn. And so these kids can't be then dictated to by parents or the ignorant parent at home or the ignorant family member or friend who says, oh, this is what it is and it's racist. And the kid, because if you're not educated, you can't fight back or have that conversation or that debate in your own household. Until you're educated and you understand the situation as to actually why are people racist, why are black people upset with the oppression, etc. This is why, actually, Dad. And then that kid's educating his dad in the end, and the dad can't actually be the person to influence that kid because he knows he's got the tools to fight back and answer back.
Adding to your point there, Ria, about them having something relatable, which is something that is closer to this day and age, is one of the reasons why I've done this racism documentary. I think is for people in sports to understand and people in football to understand, not just football but in life, to understand what is right and what is wrong. And not just that, is for the powers of football and the powers that be in corporate world to understand that they've got a role to play in terms of supporting both parties, not just the victim but supporting the perpetrator too, because that perpetrator, he needs educating. He needs to understand that the environment that he was brought up in ain't the right environment nowadays. So they can educate their children. I think that's one of the reasons why I've done this documentary, is to make sure that people understand and know that there's always two sides to a story, but both sides matter. It can't just be black people talking about racism. Everyone has to talk about it. And we're starting to get that now, which is why there's a movement within football, not just in society, but in football. You know, BLM's doing good things. There's white people, black people supporting this case and this cause. So we have to adhere to that in football. And when it was my time, it was only black people talking about it. Where was the white people? I had meetings where my mum was the only white person in the room.
Anton, and I'm looking forward to watching that documentary. But can I just say thank you, Anton and Rio. It's been genuinely fascinating. The one thing I regret is I had about 30 questions about parenting to Rio. All the different dilemmas I've got. I think, what would Rio do in this situation? I want to see if you're thinking in the same way, but let's do that another time. Finish with 3 quick-fire questions, if I may. Robbie, we're going to finish with these each week, so you can maybe join in this time if you want.
It's been fascinating, Matthew. Absolutely fascinating.
It's been great, hasn't it?
And yeah, the racism topic. You know what you three have experienced, but also that if Anton and Rio can not put their son or daughter in an academy because they don't feel they're ready, that's a big thing for me, and that is a huge thing in modern day society. The willingness for parents to put their son or daughter into an academy because they can see the financial goals when they're not ready. And then the lasting effects of them, the disappointment by being released, is mentally scarring on youngsters. So I think I've taken from this podcast that, you know, if Anton and Rio can do that, with the history and the pedigree they've got as footballers, they think, "Do you know what, my son's or daughter's not ready, we'll put them in, or they've got to do it on their own." That for me is fascinating. That for me is what I've done with my youngest son.
I think there's a thin line in it, but as a parent, making sure your kids understand this is hard work. It's not easy, it's hard work. I think that's the biggest thing. I don't think you can say that enough. Like, yeah, praise them and stuff, but I think when you're educating your kids in what they want to do, anything they want to do in life is going to be hard work. It's not going to come easy. You know, so like with my son, I always say to him, football is not easy, football is hard. You know, but the harder you work, the more you will enjoy it.
And I think to finish on that, the coronavirus has been testing for everybody, this situation. And what we've taken out of it as a family is, from my two boys especially, is what are you doing now when everybody's playing computer games and everybody's resting? What is your incentive now to go out and work? And that's what I said to him at the beginning of the when the virus kicked in. After a couple of weeks, and we're sitting there working out what you should be doing, how long we're going to be in the situation. And I was sitting there just thinking, right, I'm not going to keep asking you to go out and train. You've got to go and do it yourself. Dad, can you take me on a run? Dad, can you do some drills with me? Can you come to the park and play football? Blah, blah. And so it was just very much like that. And it's been interesting because one of my sons went back to his academy the other day and he had to do some tests and some running. And he came back and I could see he was proud of himself that he'd done well for one. But the more important thing, he acknowledged that, Dad, if I didn't work hard in that period of the virus, I'd have been behind everyone. And I felt comfortable in the top tier of the physical activities we were doing because of what we'd done at home. And that was a massive lesson. One of them's learnt it, and I'm hoping the other one has as well. But there's other things that have got to happen for him for me to realise if he has or not. But at least one of them's got it.
Rio, that's fascinating because in most families, you'll have one sibling that is more talented than the other. Do you, as a parent, do you then give more love and time to the one who's less talented, possibly? It's a very difficult balancing act for parents in that situation, I think. And I don't mean give more love, but do you spend more time possibly with
attention?
Attention. That's the one who's maybe not as good at school, who's not as quick, who's not as good on the piano, who's not as good at football. Do you give more attention to the younger sibling, or it's a difficult balancing act, isn't it?
I do both really, but I end up steering towards the one who doesn't apply himself as well. Forget talent. The one that doesn't apply himself as well and doesn't give me the intensity that I think they should, I end up leaning towards them to try and get it out of them. Do you know what I mean? Because I can leave the other one because I know he's going to do it right. I've not got to watch him do the 10th or the 11th, 12th run or drill or rep. The other one, I've got to be on him.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, here we go. In your profession, what was your weakest part of your skills and the thing you had to work the hardest to improve? Anton.
My concentration.
Rio.
Mine was the same, concentration.
Roberto.
The weakest thing was my
passing.
my physicality. I was 9 stone.
What is the one thing that you've got no talent in whatsoever but wish you had? Anton.
I was going to say DIY, but over lockdown I've realised I have. Doing the washing at home, clothes washing probably. No talent in that.
Rio.
Singing.
Really? You can't.
Yeah.
Weren't you in Bugsy Malone?
Yeah, that was when I was before my voice broke when I was about 12.
Oh, right.
If I could have been a singer, that was my next calling.
Musical instrument. I'd love to have played the guitar, the piano.
The last one. This is quite a deep question. What is the best single piece of advice that anybody has given you? Anton.
Play the game, not the occasion.
Love it. Who said that?
Rio.
Rio, what's yours?
Yeah.
Just to outwork everyone in the room.
Love it. By the way, was Ferguson a good coach? Overrated or underrated?
He was a great manager. And I think he was somebody that he'd never treated everyone with a blanket treatment. It was always very individual and he would go, right, I'll treat him differently to I'll treat him. and he had that kind of personal touch. Like my granddad was ill once, he sent flowers. He knew my granddad would come to a game, he'd be in the bar. I'd met him once or twice, but there's a brandy waiting for my granddad. Or my mum was ill in hospital, there was a bunch of flowers at the hospital. Like so, and then all of a sudden you're sitting there thinking, wow, this guy, like, but he was a very, and he led by example. He was in early, stayed late. Yeah. And if he's been there 25 years winning trophies and you come in after 1 or 2 years and you think you're going to come in late and leave early, you're going to leave quickly.
Thank you, Rio. Robbie, best piece of advice you've ever had?
So when I was 15, when I was signed for Manchester United, was leaving, my mother said to me, no matter what you do in life, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And I think when successful people, they change and, they become not nice people. The other things matter more. But I think it's nice to be important, but far more important to be nice.
Good upbringing there. Guys, thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Anton Ferdinand, Rio Ferdinand, cheers. Robbie Savage. That's the end of our first ever episode of Talent Takes Practice. We're going to be back next week with some more guests. But for now, from all of us, thank you very much.